edition of Inside the Capitol. I'm Maggie here with Jason Atkins from the Minnesota Catholic Conference. There is, per usual, a lot going on at the state capitol. Last week we talked about bill deadlines and the policy bills that they were trying to get wrapped up. This week we have another set of deadlines, but then we have a few things that happened last week, some key initiatives. Jason, do you want to tell our listeners about some of the things we've been weighing in on?
Sure. We were super encouraged last week because there was going to be a motion to bring the gambling bill off the table in the Senate State and Local Government Committee and rehear that because they thought that the proponents thought that the votes were there, given that one no vote was removed from the committee and a potential yes vote was added. But it turns out that through a lot of strong advocacy by opponents, that we were able to flip at least one member to a no vote on that committee, and then had some really great testimony that was being put in for that hearing. And ultimately what happened is that they ended up pulling the bill from consideration. So it's likely the case that's a policy bill primarily. There are some appropriations in it. It's largely a policy bill that should be dead for the session year, unless they'll try to tack it on to something else. The likelihood of that succeeding is pretty low. We'll still be monitoring that and paying very close attention to the gambling bill. But it's a really, really good news. People are waking up to the fact that this is a state-sanctioned consumer fraud scheme, that online sports gambling is like combining big tobacco and the opioid crisis. Right. And there will be some real drastic and negative consequences. Just in the last 2 weeks, there have been some shows on like CBS Sunday Morning, a segment with Ted Koppel talking about the addiction and harms of sports gambling. There was a piece on HBO, John Oliver, last week Tonight Show, that really turned a lot of people's heads. It was about a 20 or 25 minute expose about the issue. So really there's momentum on from the opponents of sports gambling. So we're really, really encouraged by that. And it just underscores, I think, Maggie, the importance of having constructive conversations with legislators on both sides of the aisle. This issue doesn't cut neatly on partisan lines, and though we might disagree with some legislators on some key issues, we can work with them on issues like sports gambling and stopping that to protect Minnesota. So just an encouragement to people to say, well, I've heard recently a talk I gave, well, legislators ignore me. Well, how are we engaging them? Are we engaging them effectively? Are you trying to build common ground for the common good? Are you bringing in your neighbors to have strength in numbers? What are the ways in which you're looking to hear their concerns, meet their needs from the standpoint of how they approach issues? So there's a lot of way of working constructively with legislators, and on this issue, we've been at odds and loggerheads with some of our key allies on sports gambling on a number of other questions, but are able to build common ground for the common good. So I think that's really an important dynamic to remember, and this sports gambling bill is just one example of that.
Right, we definitely can't assume the positions of our legislators on every bill we work on, and that's why it's so important to keep talking with them, and you never know what may happen. We had in the first hearing, it ended up with a tie. It likely was going to be a tie again. You don't get those if you don't talk to your legislators and actually see where they're at. So that's so important, and it's great to have another victory in this space, and really in support of families, putting families first. Jason, what's another thing that we're doing for families this session?
So we've had our Families First project that you can learn more about at familiesfirstproject.com, and that's a bill to strengthen family economic security. One of the real challenges to family economic security right now is the affordability of homes. Everyone is sensing that. I think the average or the median home price in the Twin Cities is $450,000 now, which is, I think, another statistic I heard is the average age of a first-time home buyer is 38. So there's no, you graduate from college, you get your first job, and you buy a home. That just isn't a reality, and if it's more difficult for people to buy homes, it's going to be harder for them to start families, maybe discourage people from forming families altogether. So housing affordability is really a key issue, and part of the problem is not just prices, it's the prices that are created and are inflated simply because of regulations. So there's a whole bunch of bills. It's called the Yes to Homes campaign Minnesota. They're proposing a bunch of different bills to make housing more affordable and lowering prices by lowering regulations. One of those bills is one that we're supporting, the Minnesota Starter Homes Act, which is Senate File 2229 and House File 1987. That's an important bill to create more flexibility in housing construction in residential zoned areas. So if there's a residential zoning area in a city, then more permissible types of dwellings are permitted, and it's a way of the state preempting local governments from trying to create only one type of housing in a particular area because of the NIMBY problem, as we say, not in my backyard, and create more housing supply. So by creating flexibility in housing construction based on different zoning requirements, we're going to be creating more housing supply, hopefully with markets driving the price of houses down across a wide variety of areas and making that home and putting that home more in reach of more Minnesotans. Another important thing is it provides more flexibility on accessory dwellings. And that's a really big issue, especially from a care for the elderly and vulnerable standpoint. Long-term care costs being what they are, how can we create more opportunities for people to live at home, for example, or have an accessory dwelling where a relative can live and be cared for, have some layer of family connection and not be in a long-term care facility because we're creating accessory dwellings and providing more flexibility there. So some really, really important points. We think a lot about family and family politics. There's some real economic and regulatory things that we can do to encourage family as well. So that Minnesota Starter Home Act is a really, really important development. I think we're proud to support that. Grateful to Representative Spencer Igo, one of our Catholic members, and then Senator Lindsay Port from Burnsville, who are sponsoring and leading that legislation.
Right, and it's so important if we want to help the formation of families, if we want families to be able to feel like they're actually rooted, having a home is so important to that. So we sent a letter to those legislators sharing our support for that. You can find that on our website. We have all of our testimony up on our website. We also have a bill tracker on our website. We show the Jason and I here, we talk about a variety of bills we take positions on, but there's others that we probably don't cover that we do take positions on and engage on. You can find all of that online on our bill tracker, mncatholic.org/bill tracker, to see the positions that we're taking, what we support and oppose, and what the church is engaged in at the state capitol here.
And we can't devote the same sort of resources to every
Right.
piece of legislation. We have a very, very small staff, so sometimes it's taking a position on our bill tracker, letting people know publicly that we support or oppose something, maybe doing a letter, maybe testifying, maybe talking to legislators, maybe working in coalition. So there's all sorts of ways that you can engage on a piece of legislation, but one important way, one very basic way, is just communicating public support. And you as a Catholic in the pew can see that and then work with your legislators on that and provide a little bit more advocacy resources and time into that issue. So it's a way of keeping the Catholic community informed about what we're doing, what we think is important, and giving you an opportunity to take action as well.
Right, and if you see one of the bills on our bill tracker and you say, I'm really passionate about that, or I have experience in that, and you want to know how to maybe direct that passion, you can definitely reach out to us and we can help you figure out what those next steps are, how to connect with your legislator. Of course, we make that really easy on our priority issues by having action alerts. We don't, again, have action alerts up for every issue that we're weighing in on or taking a position on. So maybe one of those other issues you want to talk with us about, we're happy to answer any questions and help you in that way.
And one other thing about the bill tracker, which is such a great resource, is that if you click on those bills, you can learn about who the authors are, you can read the bills, you can see where they are in the legislative process. So it's really, really a helpful tool that we make available for Catholics and the general public.
Right. Great, and I mentioned right at the beginning, it's deadline week, so this is the third deadline at the legislature. Jason, what's going on with that? What do we expect to happen this week?
So we have deadlines in the legislative process to manage the work of the legislature, but also to say if a bill hasn't reached a certain point in the legislative process, then it really should be cast aside. It hasn't. It's not ready for prime time, is the vernacular or the slang around here at the Capitol. But this week is third deadline, meaning finance and appropriations bills need to have had a hearing if they're going to be moved forward and then either put into a finance bill package or be a part of that budget process at the end. So it's really a big week. We're already starting to see some omnibus finance bills being rolled out before the Easter Passover break, which is coming up next week.
Right. Yeah, so we'll see what happens this week. We always watch the calendars closely, see what bills pop up. There always is something that we don't expect that pops up and we might need to weigh in on. So if anything happens, we'll definitely update you next week on what's going on. But after this Friday, then the legislators have a 10-day break to celebrate Passover and Easter, which is I think a welcome break for many of the people over at the Capitol.
And us lobbyists too.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this week's edition of Inside the Capitol. We'll be back with you next week for another update. Thanks so much and God bless you.
Thank you.